Let's talk HTML. In this video, we're going to go through how we can structure an HTML page, some of the basics behind HTML, and then we're also going to use JavaScript to manipulate the content of this HTML page that we're creating. So first of all, what is HTML? HTML is a way that we can structure web pages. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and we'll be using it right here to create a newsletter. In this case, the newsletter we're creating needs to have two input fields initially, one for the name and one for the email. Furthermore, we then need to add some JavaScript code that then manipulates a page and adds a title field where the user can enter their title. So that would be Mr. or Mrs. or something like that. So let's just jump right into it. So let's get started by telling the HTML page what it is. And we're going to do that by using the doc type you'll see right here. So this is used in HTML for the browsers to understand what it's trying to read, and it's just helped up speed things a little bit. So this just, in case you're using Chrome, this will mean that Chrome knows when it sees this, oh, this is HTML I'm trying to render. Perfect. So an HTML page starts out with an HTML tag like so. And you'll notice that there's two of them now. One of them is just like this, and the other one has this little dash. And what that means is that the HTML starts here and it ends here, and then we can place stuff inside it. And this allows HTML to act like a tree structure, which I'll get into a bit later. So in this case, we're just gonna proceed. From HTML, there's usually two elements you use here. We'll use head, and we'll use body. So the body is where the action happens, or somewhat at least. This is where you'll see the output of the HTML. The head is more metadata. It's things that you load, for example, style sheets and scripts and such. In this case, we are going to add, we're going to add a title to it, like so. And we'll just enter newsletter over here. And right now my live server isn't refreshing, and that's because I need to reload it after you clear everything. Let's do that, and you'll see that it says newsletter up here. Just to follow along, I'm gonna press F12. This is gonna open the developer console in Chrome, and we can follow along over here and see what's happening. So disregard this part of it. This is only because I'm using live server to automatically reload the page. Anyway, back to the HTML. So I talked about that we needed to have these fields where the user can sign up. In this case, we're going to create a section like so, and then we're going to create a header. Let's say sign up to my awesome newsletter. Please. Perfect. This looks great, right? Next up, we need to have a form. A form is usually used whenever you want to process data in HTML, and we're going to give this a class name. Class name is used to signify that its element is something. So many different elements can share the same tag. So we could also give these the same tag. For example, form group and form group. In this case, form group doesn't make any sense on the h1 tag. So I'm just going to remove this, and we'll just be using it only for the form over here. But please note that you can use the same name many times for class on elements. So now we need to add the inputs right here. So we'll create an input first, and we'll call it, we'll add a type to it and say that it's just plain text. Then we'll create a placeholder so the user knows what to enter in here. That's a name. And we'll of course close it right away. And you can see that the placeholder has been put over here, so it's reflecting it. Next up, we need another input for the email. Luckily, we can also use email down here, and placeholder email. So this may be a problem, at least for me. I want this to be on the next line. Of course, you should close this tag first. Anyway, to put this on a new line, we use the BR. The better ways to do this with CSS, but we're just gonna stick to the HTML in this example. I'm going to use another BR down here because we also need a button to apply or sign up. Like so, and it's reflected. The next thing we want to do is we're going to say that this should be a button. And the reason why we need this to be a button is that if I just remove this again, it's going to default to submit. I remove it again. And then when I click it, you'll see that the page is refreshing. That's because it's trying to send this request, and that's not what we want to do when we're working with JavaScript, at least sometimes. In this case, we want it to act like a standard button that doesn't submit the form, like so. And lastly, before we get started with some JavaScript, we need to add some IDs so we can reference these elements within our JavaScript later on. So I'm going to give this an ID, like so. We'll say name is the ID of this. This should have an ID of email, and this should have an ID of let's just call it save. So when you want to reference these things in JavaScript or in CSS for that matter, we can use the ID to select this specific button, for example. So in that case, it would be button hashtag save. So what that means is that the button that it's looking for a button with the ID of save. Now you're asking, but what about the class we have up here? How can we access that? Well, there's also a way we can access that or reference it. So we can say form dot, and dot then signifies that it's a class we're looking for. Form group. Actually, let's just rename this to input group to make it more clear what's happening. Once again, input group. There we go. Yeah, so this is looking for a form with the class of input group. And let's just do it for the last ones to really show what's going on. So we take the element name, and then we have a hashtag for the ID name. And again, right here, input hashtag email. Easy peasy. So this allows us to easily interact with these things. And to just show you that this is working, now that LiveShare has updated everything, we can say document query selector, and then we can use, for example, the input hashtag name. And what you'll see right away is that this is finding a reference to our element up here. So that's a way for us to easily interact with this element, because now we have a way to tell them apart. With that said, I'm just going to add some simple style CSS to this page to make it just a little bit prettier. Once again, here we are selecting the section tag, and if it had a class on it, we can also say class name right here, but it doesn't, so we're going to go on. We'll then give it border 3 pixels. Let's use red because that's just really good color. And lastly, just say that it should be a solid border. And look at that, how pretty it is. I want to also add a little bit of padding to make this, to give it some more space. And now it has a bit more room to breathe. So now that our page is all pretty and such, we're going to get started with some JavaScript in just a second, actually. So let's review. We've created this HTML page right now. And I mentioned earlier that you can view the HTML as a tree structure. So if I open this image I have here, we can see how this HTML is also formatted as a tree. In this case, we see that there's an HTML at the top, and that's what we're seeing right here. It expands into 2 elements, the head and the body, right here and here. The head has this title and the style, that's what we're seeing over here. And the interesting part is the body, where it has a section. And within the section, it has the h1 and then a form.input group. And that's also what we're seeing here. Remember that the dot says that it has a class of input group. If we expand this form, we'll also see that we have an input with the ID of name, because the hashtag says that that's the ID. Then we have a BR, that's what we're seeing right here. Then we have another input, email, right here. And then lastly, we have another BR and then the button. And this allows us, when you can view the HTML as a tree-like structure, we can easily interact with it and, for example, place stuff in between after. And that's going to be useful in a second when we need to add a new field onto this page. So I promised that we were gonna go into some JavaScript, so let's get started. We're gonna place this up in the header, or the head again. We'll write script and expand it, and now we can write some simple JavaScript in here. So let's just once again load one of these elements. Document, query, selector, and then just for the sake of it, let's say .input group. So you'll notice that I didn't say form, and that's because if you say form, right, like down here, this is going to look for an element that is a form and also has the class input group. In this case, it doesn't really matter because this is already the only element on the whole page that has input group. So I can instead say .input group, and I know this is the one it's going to be referencing. But if I had, for example, a span tag down here where I said class input group like so, then the query selector would pick this one instead. However, if I said form like so, it's going to pick this one instead because this satisfies this this selection that we're looking for, form with a class of input group. Anyway, let's delete this real quick. Alright, so I'm gonna console log because I want to show you something real quick. So you'll notice when I save this, down in our console it's saying null. Well, why is it saying null? The thing is, this code is being run before the HTML has finished loading, which means that when we're trying to select this, this hasn't been loaded yet. It's not there, it's gone. So what we need to do is we need to wait for the script, or we need to wait for the document to be loaded and then run our code. And that's actually really easy. We can just say window.unload, give it a function that it should run when it's done loading, like so. And we can move this up into this one, and I of course needs to spell function correctly, like so. You'll see now that I've saved it and it's reloaded, that now it's working correctly and it's able to reference this whole entire form right here. Anyway, we don't really need this, so let's just keep going. So now we need to create a new input, and the way that we create a new input, which is an element, is we use the document.create element, like so. The first argument in create element expects the tag we need to use, and we want to use the same tag as the other inputs, so we're just gonna say input, like so. It's now created, but you'll not be seeing it on the page because even though it's created up here, we haven't put it anywhere on the page just yet. I'm gonna put this into a new element, so we'll say title element, like so. And now we created a new element, or we put it into this variable. I'm gonna give it an ID of title. And what this means is that when we create an element down here, or actually I can write this out to show you what this is going to look like. So this would be input, and then the ID is going to be title, because we just told it that right here. And that's essentially what's going to happen right now. So now that we've created this element, we need a way to put it into this form. So here we can use the query selector we used earlier, document.query selector, and in this case we want to select the input group. So form.input group, and we're going to save that to a variable of, again, input group, and then this element has a method on it called append child. And append child makes a lot of sense when you think of HTML as a tree-like structure. If I go back here, we can see the form here. This would be all of its current children. And from the perspective of this input, its parent would be the form input group, which makes it really easy to work along. So the parent for the input with an ID of name is form with the class of input group. The parent of this one is section, the parent of this one is body, and the parent of this one is HTML. And then if we go the other way around, the children of HTML is head and body, the children of body is section, the children of section is h1 and the form input group, and so on. So in this case, when we know this, we can append a child onto this this part down here by referencing this form input group like we already did over here. So when I say append child, we can just give it the element we want to append, and when I say we should see the element being put over onto the screen like so. But here's a problem. It's been put into the end. So append child will put it right down here at the end, and that's not exactly where we want to put it. So what we need to do instead is that we need to use another function that allows us to place it another place. So what we can do here instead is we can say that we want to place, we can use another function called insert before, which allows us to insert an element before something else. So the first argument is, what do we want to insert? Well, we want to insert the title element. Where do we want to insert it? Or where do we want to insert before? Well, if I take input group and then first child, and if we go back to the structure over here, we'll see that the first child is the input with an ID of name. Then this will be, the title element will be inserted before that, which means that our the new title will be put over here. And as you can see right now, if we look over into the section, form, input, right here, it's at the top like we expected. And we can also see this with the tree, it's now put right here. And that's looking really nice, but we have another little problem. And that's that we need to put this down into another line. So we need to create a new element again. So let's just do that real quick. In this case, we can use another function again to put something in relation to another element. And I'm thinking that in which we take the title element and then we want to place an element right beside it right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the title element and we're going to use the function insert adjacent element, and then we're going to tell it where we want to place it. I already said that I wanted to place it, that's the wrong one, sorry. I wanted to place it right here. So that is called after end. So after, look down here, after the end of this tag. And it's also going to ask me, well, what do you want to place there? In this case, since we don't need to do anything else with it, I'm just going to say document.create element and br. And voila, it's looking good. Last, we just want to give it a placeholder as well. And just to reflect that down here so you understand what's going on. Like so. And right now everything is working. The BR has been placed after the end of the input with an ID of title, and everything is working. Yeah, that's a small introduction on how we can manipulate and query the HTML. I hope this video gave a better sense and understanding of how HTML works and how we can interact with it in JavaScript. Thank you so much for watching.